When the earthquake struck on Tuesday evening, I knew that I had to go to Haiti because I had been there twice before, and it's a country that I'm very passionate about. So, but of course our company is in bankruptcy protection, so I didn't think there was any hope of getting there. And I got an email from a friend of mine from CBC who said, I'm heading to Haiti, wish me luck. And I was just so envious. And so I sent an email off to the Gazette and just said, you know, dumb question, are you sending anyone to Haiti? And if so, can I go? And they wrote back and said, when can you be ready? And I was just like, oh, okay, as soon as possible. And so that was 8 o'clock Wednesday morning, and by noon I was at Dorval Airport. So then I flew from there to Newark and then Santo Domingo. And in Santo Domingo, of course, everybody was clamoring to get into the country. So luckily, the photographer I was with had a connection through the Army, and a guy who was with the Dominican military who secured us 2 seats on a small helicopter, a 6-seater. But we needed a lot of cash to get on that, and we didn't have a lot of cash. So we spent all day Wednesday going, or Thursday, Thursday, going bank to bank to bank to get advances on our Amex cards. And finally we secured $5,000 each cash. And but meanwhile, the military guy was calling the pilot saying, okay, we're almost there, we're stuck in traffic, we're coming, because the pilot was going to give away our seats. So by the time we reached the airport, the price had soared to $6,900. So we just, I knew the Gazette would freak over that, but I just threw them, I said, we're going. So we go out to the tarmac, and the pilot, you know, the blades are going, and I'm passing all these other journalists who are on the phone to their offices saying, we can't get there, we can't get there. And the pilot said, no baggage, just you, no baggage. So I took my laptop, and Phil, the photographer, grabbed his gear, and we left our knapsacks behind with all our clothes and everything. And off we went into Haiti, and they dropped us at the Dominican embassy, which was sort of standing like this. And meanwhile, my office had emailed me and said, no problem, we've booked you 2 rooms and paid for it with our credit card at the El Rancho Hotel. So when we stepped down, I said to one of the Dominicans, so do you know where the El Rancho Hotel is? And he said, yeah, it's right over there. And it was totally flattened. So our room was basically the grass at the Dominican embassy. We had no blankets, we had no clothes, we had no food, we had no water. And so I said to Phil, well, we might as well start working. So we went out into the street, and it was like nothing I have ever seen in my life. I mean, there were bodies everywhere, all over the road, dead bodies. The rubble was down. People were praying and singing, and at that point the smell hadn't really started yet, because it had just been 48 hours after. I mean, there was a bit, but not much. But people were digging through the rubble with their bare hands, small picks, tiny shovels. They didn't have the proper equipment at all. So it was getting dark, and I was a bit concerned, like, do I stay out at night, or you know, but I felt that the situation was secure enough. Like, I didn't feel threatened at all. So I stayed at this one scene where these Haitian men, young guys, were digging out this hospital for handicapped kids, and they were searching for the body of a 22-year-old American woman who had come down to volunteer, and her name was Molly, and they were determined to find this body of Molly so that her parents would have some closure. And I think her parents lived in Seattle. Anyway, these guys, I just sat with them for, you know, they would take breaks, and they would come and sit on the hood of a car and talk. And they said to me, you know, we're really happy that you came and that you're listening to us, and you're not like the TV journalists, the TV journalists that just come in for the shot and then leave. Like, you're really listening to us and feeling the pain that we're feeling. So I kind of became like a psychologist, a nurse, a doctor. I was doing all kinds of jobs, which made it a very unusual story journalistically, because usually you keep your distance, but this time you couldn't. So The next day, of course, I walked. There was no way to get around. There was no gas, so vehicles were few and far between. And even if you had gas, a lot of times the vehicle had been crushed. So I walked and walked and walked and literally stepped over bodies and stopped at scenes where they were pulling people out dead out of the rubble, people screaming, crying. I would be hugging people and just telling them, you know, we're with you and Canada's with you and the whole world is supporting you, and, you know, just courage. So that day I walked all the way to the hospital, and on my way I met this young guy, and by the time we reached the hospital I had proposed to him that I hire him to be sort of my assistant, you know, my Haitian, they call it a fixer, who, you know, could take me places or direct me to places or whatever. And he was living in one of these tent cities that the Haitians had set up overnight himself. So he was sleeping under the stars and with his young son and his wife, and had nothing to eat. In fact, I think he halved in size by the whole time I was there that I got to know him. So I started going into these tent cities, and when you say tent cities, it sounds quite organized and elaborate, when in fact it was just the Haitian people who had set up tents themselves, like with bed sheets, with whatever they could salvage from the rubble. And they were on soccer fields, they were on golf courses, so anywhere where there's an open space and no danger of a building falling on them, because everyone was terrified to go inside a building, even if their house was still standing. So I went in, and of course people are desperate for medical care, for, you know, their limbs are, like I saw this one young girl, her hand was missing, gangrene had already set in, there were maggots on the stub of her wrist. I'm sure she's dead now because she wasn't getting care, and, you know, you can't live very long that way. You know, in this one camp I visited, 11 babies were born, 2 like in front of me. I was helping them out with the help of my sister who's a midwife. I'd text her and say, like, what do I do? And she'd text me back and tell me how to deliver these babies. And I was stitching up wounds and helping medics that would come in just on their own, helping the Haitian doctors. So it was a scene, I mean, it was incredible. And as the days went on, the bodies became more and more bloated and smelly, and but at the same time as the days went on, life started getting back to, well, Haitians started getting back to living a somewhat normal life, like selling things on the street and cooking and, you know, trying some kind of, like, having funerals. And so it was quite extraordinary from that point of view.